Okay, so let's talk about transferring and transformation of energy in ecosystems. Here's the syllabus objective. We need to be able to explain the transfer and transformation of energy as it flows through the biotic components of an ecosystem, including conversion of light into chemical energy, production of biomass and how it interacts with the carbon cycle, and also loss of energy as heat. So let's get into it then. We need to differentiate between transformation and transfer. An energy transformation is when we change the energy from one form to another. So, for example, photosynthesis converts light energy from the sun to chemical energy. And cellular respiration converts chemical energy in the form of food. And cellular respiration converts chemical energy into heat energy. Whereas an energy transfer is when it stays in the same form and passes from one organism to another but remains in that same form. So the chemical energy that's stored in organic matter gets passed to the next organism when it gets eaten. So here's a little diagram to try and summarize that. Ultimately, all of the energy in an ecosystem comes from the sun and in the form of light energy. And our producers, our plants primarily, through the process of photosynthesis, transform that light energy to chemical energy. And they create what we call biomass. And biomass is organic matter. I'm going to define that on the next slide. So then the energy then that's contained in the biomass of the plant then is passed on or transferred through the food chain without it actually being changed from chemical energy. So the rabbit here eats the leaves of the plant or eats the grass, and that chemical energy that's stored in that biomass is transferred into chemical energy in this rabbit and then to the owl. Remains as chemical energy. But you'll also see that some of that energy, and in fact quite a lot of that energy, doesn't make its way from the grass to the rabbit. Much of it is actually lost in two ways. So up here we have cellular respiration. So plants and animals and all organisms undergo cellular respiration, where chemical energy is broken down to make ATP, but ultimately it forms heat energy. And so much of the energy is actually lost this way. But then also, some of the energy is also passed when the organism dies or in undigested food that the organism passes through as waste. And then we have decomposers that break down that chemical energy in the dead organisms and the waste, again to produce heat energy through that process of cellular respiration. So ultimately you see that the energy is lost. Energy is not recycled, energy is lost. We start with energy from the sun, and ultimately it gets lost as heat energy. The take-home message here is transformations are when we change the form of energy, so for example from light energy to chemical energy, or from chemical energy to heat energy. And energy is transferred when it stays in the same form. For example, in the organic matter, that biomass that gets passed from one level of the ecosystem to the other. Now, so here's my definition of biomass. Biomass is the dry weight of all organic matter in the ecosystem. Now, it's the dry weight because we're not trying to weigh the water, we're trying to weigh the matter, and because the matter stores energy in chemical bonds. So if you have a look here, we've got glucose, C6H12O6, and the energy in that, the chemical energy is stored between the carbon-carbon bonds and the carbon-hydrogen bonds. And it's that energy that gets released through cellular respiration to make ATP, but much of it also is lost as heat energy. Because cellular respiration is a combustion reaction. It's burning organic matter in the presence of oxygen. So just like a fire, or just like a Bunsen burner, much of the energy is lost as heat energy. So photosynthesis then is an endothermic reaction because it absorbs energy. It absorbs light energy and stores that light energy in the carbon-carbon bonds and the carbon-hydrogen bonds of organic matter that we call biomass. And then cellular respiration is exothermic because it releases the energy that's stored in those bonds as heat. Now, one of the syllabus objectives here was to talk about how this relates to the carbon cycle. So, inorganic carbon that's in the atmosphere gets taken into plants and fixed to make glucose. And this glucose then passes through the organisms, the plants and the animals, etc. And then through cellular respiration, it then gets released back into the atmosphere. So we're going to talk more about the carbon cycle another time. It's another syllabus objective, but I've got a link here to a video if you want to have a look at it again now. Just as a bit of a summary then for what we've talked about, light energy from the sun is transformed into chemical energy and stored in the carbon-containing organic compounds that we call biomass. Chemical energy then is transferred through each trophic or feeding levels, each level of the food chain or food web, as chemical energy when it gets eaten. The chemical energy in food is then transformed to heat energy through cellular respiration. So ultimately, energy is not recycled, energy is lost. However, matter, in the form of carbon and oxygen, etc., is recycled. And that's when we come to the carbon cycle. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is brought into organic organisms through photosynthesis. It's fixing that carbon. And then plants and animals, through respiration, take it back into the atmosphere. Then we have other processes as well that we're going to talk about in more detail later.